day 2 of our 14th annual FAA Commercial Space Transportation Conference. We had a great program yesterday. I think today you'll find is even better. So let's get started. During his 2 years on the job, Secretary Ray LaHood, who the Washington Post has called the most out there Secretary of Transportation in history, has set about the work of reimagining and rebuilding America's infrastructure. He oversees nearly $50 billion of Recovery Act projects, which are putting Americans back to work rebuilding their communities. He's the administration's champion for a national high-speed passenger rail system and is point man for livable communities, places where transit brings housing in closer proximity to jobs and businesses. Secretary LaHood is leading a global campaign against distracted driving, which claimed 5,500 lives and injured 500,000 Americans in 2009 alone. And he's undertaking all of this work and more at the same time as he's setting the standard for bipartisanship and civility in a national debate, as one of 2 Republicans in President Obama's cabinet. Some of you may know that while Secretary LaHood is a grandfather of 9, he's also the 2nd most popular blogger in the federal government, right after President Obama himself. So if you have an interest in keeping close tabs on what's going on at DOT, you can check out Secretary LaHood's daily posts at www.fastlane.dot.gov. Please join me in welcoming 16th U.S. Secretary of Transportation, the Honorable Ray LaHood.
Good morning, and let me add my welcome on your 2nd day of this spectacular meeting. When I look at that video up there, I think that there are a very, very small group of people who know everything there is to know about a very complex program, and I think that small group of people, almost all of them, are gathered in this room. When you think about the fact that America has more than over 300 million people in our country, and you think about the program that we just watched and how it's developed over time, very few of us among the over 300 million Americans really understand what it takes to develop a program like that. One of the reasons that I came here this morning was to say thank you to all of you for being involved in really continuing a really, really important program for our country and for the world. And I know that in this room are gathered some of the smartest people in the world. And I thank you for the work you do. I thank you for continuing a very, very long, strong tradition of making sure that these programs continue decade after decade. I also want to thank George for his extraordinary leadership. He's one of those very smart people that I'm referring to. I know that he knows a lot more about what I'm going to talk about than I do, and he was helpful in putting together my remarks. I also want to thank our administrator, Randy Babbitt, who you heard from yesterday. I think we're extraordinarily lucky to have someone at the FAA with Randy's experience as a professionally trained pilot. The truth is that nobody can put anything over on Randy because he knows it, he's done it, and he has practiced safety all of his life in aviation, and so we're delighted that he took the time and has taken the time and energy to really work hard as our administrator. 50 years ago, President Kennedy committed to landing an American on the moon within a decade. But as we all know, it didn't happen in 10 years. It took just 8. It happened because once the president set that daring goal, thousands of scientists and engineers rolled up their sleeves and got to work. And it goes to my point, politicians like to take credit for the spectacular things we do in America, but I believe the people in this room and those whose shoulders you stand on are the ones that deserve the lion's share of the credit for putting a man on the moon and for all of the advances we have made since then. This happened because Americans dream big dreams and do big things. Standing at point A, we may not always see a clear path to point B, but we know we'll find a way to get there. It was no different when President Eisenhower signed the Federal Highway Act into law in 1956. President Eisenhower didn't know specifically or exactly how or where each mile of road would be paved, but he knew that building an interstate system would help our country grow and prosper, and it did. And 50 years later, we have a state-of-the-art interstate system. I was meeting with some reporters yesterday talking about high-speed rail, and we have a very ambitious plan at the Department of Transportation. It's the President's vision. It's the same kind of vision that President Eisenhower had about the interstate system, and it's the same kind of vision that President Kennedy had about putting a man on the moon. Big, big vision. And the vision means that within 25 years, we're going to connect 80% of America with high-speed intercity rail. And someone asked me, well, what about these states that have said they don't want to get into the high-speed rail? Well, that's not going to deter us, because over the 25-year period, I believe America will be connected, just like America is connected after 5 decades with the state-of-the-art interstate system. And I have no doubt that when President Kennedy announced that we were going to put a man on the moon within a decade, there were the skeptics, and there were those that said you can't do it. But that didn't deter Americans and smart people from moving ahead with it. And as I said, you now are standing on the shoulders of those people, and you haven't been deterred. And it was no different than when President Lincoln signed the Pacific Railway Act in 1862. He couldn't know for certain whether the Union would survive, let alone see the Transcontinental Railroad completion. But he knew that a world-class nation demanded a world-class rail system to move people and products from coast to coast. So our challenges today are just as significant, especially when it comes to the next frontier in America's transportation system, commercial space. In his State of the Union speech, President Obama talked about what it would take for America's economy to grow and compete. He said that to win the future, we must out-innovate and outbuild the rest of the world. Well, no one is innovating more than the men and women who are building America's emerging commercial space industry, all of you gathered here. As you know, commercial space holds vast, untapped opportunities for transport, tourism, and economic development. The era of government's monopoly on space exploration and commerce is over. And we've yet to fully figure out how to help the private sector assume responsibility for taking cargo and customers to low Earth orbit reliability effectively, and most importantly of all, safely. The Department of Transportation, we see 2 immediate challenges. First, moving satellite, people, or supplies to low Earth orbit. As you know, that's been handled by the Space Shuttle for some time. Now, with only a few shuttle missions left, private companies are stepping up to meet the need, and they'll do so with increasing frequency. Second, designing, building, and testing vessels for suborbital space tourism. Tourist rockets will soon scratch the edge of our atmosphere, allowing passengers to see the Earth and the deep skies of the space. A number of companies are getting in the business, and it won't be long before we see commercial application. We want to be supportive, and we want to be as supportive as possible, and we also want to make sure that space tourism is safe. We don't have all the solutions. That's why we keep George around. And I do know that they'll start with 2 commitments: innovation and partnership. The Department of Transportation recognizes that this is a time to encourage innovation, and we want to encourage all of you, and a time to explore new ways of working. And also a time to reimagine the relationship between government and industry. If I use our illustration of high-speed intercity rail, there's not enough money in our country to implement high-speed intercity rail and connect America in 25 years. But if we get private companies who've been in this business to come here to America and help us, we will realize our dreams. And the same is true for the work that you do. If we take some private investment and some public investment, we will reach our goals. And we have already begun to put our money where our mouth is. Take 3 initiatives we're already working on: expanding the Spaceport Grant Program, standing up a Center of Excellence for Commercial Space Transportation at New Mexico State University, and laying groundwork for a DOT FAA office on the Space Coast that keeps America's best and brightest working in Florida and supporting the emerging commercial space industry. When President Obama announced the idea that we were going to allow the private sector to become more involved in the space program, we obviously knew that caused a great deal of heartburn, particularly to people in Florida who spent their entire lives working on this. That's when we decided to collaborate with NASA and take these smart people and really engage them, and engage them in a way that builds on their experience and expertise and try and marry it with the private sector. So we're only at the starting point. The pace of innovation in the private sector will only accelerate. There will be times when you wish the government maybe we're not involved, but we hope there will be times when you are glad the government is involved. What we ask in return is that you make safety your #1 priority, because that's our #1 priority. The people that work at the Department of Transportation wake up every day and think about safety, particularly as it relates to trains and planes and automobiles and trucks, buses and school buses and coach buses, because we know that when people board an airplane, as many people are doing this morning all over America, they do it with the idea that the pilot is well trained, that the plane is mechanically okay, that the air traffic controller is well trained, that the airspaces are safe, that TSA has screened all the people that have come through the airport, and they take all of that for granted. And the same is true when people get in their cars. They believe the car that they're getting in is the safest they could possibly drive. Those are the things that we think about every day at DOT. For the people that are driving in America, whether it's on a bus or a coach or children on a school bus or people in cars or people on airplanes. So we do find ourselves in an exciting position. We know that commercial space is a dangerous pursuit, but we also know that it's important to our nation. Beyond the tangible economic potential, it's an important reminder of who we are and what we do. We look to the heavens as young children, and our minds are filled with wonder. We may feel small as we gaze upon brilliant stars, but we're inspired to dream big. And I would encourage all of you to continue to dream big. There's never been a more important time to dream and do big things. The way that President Eisenhower inspired people to build an interstate system, the way that President Kennedy inspired people to put a man on the moon, and now the way that President Obama has inspired people to stand on the shoulders of those who came before and continue the magnificent work that has gone on. Our message today is simple. We're in awe of the stuff you're doing, and we need your help. Help us answer the questions. How do we make space travel more routine while upholding the highest standard for safety? How do we make it more affordable? How do we assemble all the pieces of this complicated puzzle? No one would mistake these for easy issues, but think of the possibilities if you all get it right, if we all get it right. Before this Pacific Railway Act, Americans traveled by horse or by foot. The idea of a cross-country journey was unimaginable. Before the Federal Highway Act, travelers were literally stuck in the mud. They were forced to take long, insufficient, and often inadequate back roads to reach their destination. And before the Apollo program, the notion that a man could, and in the famous words of President Reagan, touch the face of God, seemed like science fiction. It's remarkable to think that some of us in this room today may travel to space, not as astronauts or PhDs, but as tourists. 42 years after Neil Armstrong took his small step and giant leap on Tranquility Base, we learned this week that a company has booked the first commercial flight in his footprints. For future generations, commercial space transportation could well be a way of life, another mode of transportation, as commonly used as our roadways, railways, and transit systems. So, as we take measure of this uncharted territory, as we continue to pioneer it, we must set a new course. We can figure this out. I have no doubt of it. We're Americans. We dream big, we think big, and we do big things. And I know we will, because that's what Americans do. We're innovators, we're builders. And if we tap the timeless American spirit of dreaming big and building big, the future is ours to win. We're counting on you. And we want you to know you not only have partners at DOT, FAA, you have partners in the White House and in this administration. So help us to dream big, do big things, and build big. If you do that, you will continue to stand on the shoulders of those who came before you. Thank you very much. Now, George and I are going to answer questions. He'll probably answer most of them. Because I know you all are very smart, and everybody in here is a lot smarter than I am. But if you have a question, I'll be happy to turn it over to George and see if he can answer it for you. Anybody have a question or comment? I really like to do this because I don't like just having these one-way conversations. I know you don't mind sitting there listening to a speech because that's what you do when you come to these meetings. But if anybody wants to ask it, yes, sir.
What are the greatest challenges that you see for a high-speed rail system?
Really, the question is, what is the biggest challenge for high-speed intercity rail? Really trying to find a way to pay for it. It really is. We've made an $11 billion investment over 24 months. We've put $11 billion out in California, Florida, the Midwest, the Northeast corridor. So we're at the starting gate. But the truth is, when President Eisenhower signed the interstate bill, he had no idea where all the money was coming from. They hadn't really thought about the Highway Trust Fund at that point. But over 50 years, the Highway Trust Fund built the interstate system. And I guarantee you, not all the lines were on the map. We have a good high-speed rail plan. It's a very expensive plan. It really is. So what we've done is, over the last 24 months, traveled to countries where they've implemented high-speed rail, where their governments have invested mightily in high-speed rail. So we've been to France, Germany, Spain, Italy, Japan, China. These are the countries that have made huge investments. In Spain, the trains go 250 miles an hour, and they're all full. You go into these train stations, they're full. And they're multimodal. People take a bus there, they ride their bike there, some walk there, some drive their cars, they get on these trains, they go 250 miles an hour, within a couple hours they're at their destination. Comfortably, with good service, good food, and at a cost that people can afford. And the same is true in Japan and China, Italy, Now, Germany and France have sort of been in the high-speed rail business for a while, and their trains aren't quite as fast. They're more like maybe the Acela, if you will. But look at, we're not going to be dissuaded by the fact that this is expensive because of what I said earlier. Americans, I mean, the reason we're in the place we're at with the space program and transportation is because we've had people who will think big. The president has a big vision about this. This is his initiative. He put $8 billion in the stimulus bill. And so we've asked companies from these countries to come to America and only do two things. Bring your expertise and hire Americans to build the train sets in America. And that's what they're doing. They're partnering in California and Florida. You have companies from France and Germany, and you have companies from Spain in America right now wanting to partner. So we're going to try and leverage some of these private dollars with our public money. I was with Vice President Biden in Philadelphia a few days ago, and Vice President Biden announced that the President has put in our budget, which will be announced on Monday, $50 billion for high-speed rail. Now, you know, that may not sound like a lot of money, but that's it's a pretty good investment over 6 years. Coupled with the $11 billion that we've put out, we can really begin to make progress. In California, they've been working on high-speed rail for 10 years. Florida, same way. And so we're excited about this. This is the next generation of transportation. This is what we owe to the next generation. The way that we owe to the last generation their ability to build an interstate system. Or we owe it to all of you for what you've done to get us to where we're at with space travel. You all owe it to the next generation to get us in a spaceship so we can become tourists. And I know that's what you dream about and think about and what you'll be doing. Yes, sir.
You mentioned looking at Japan and Italy and other countries and what they have done. Are you looking to just replicate what the other countries have done, or to leapfrog their technology and look beyond to potentially like maglev and other technologies?
Maglev is very expensive, and maglev is being utilized in China, probably more than any other place. We're probably looking at more traditional forms of high-speed rail. But if we could get to if California, which is going to build all new infrastructure, for example, in Illinois, the train will go from Chicago to St. Louis, and it'll probably have 4 stops. Our investment goes to fix up the track so the train can go at speeds of 150, 170 miles an hour. In California, they're building all new infrastructure. They're actually building the tracks, they're building the train sets to get trains up to 200 miles an hour. And the same is true in Florida. So, you know, everything, you know, depending on where you're at, in the Northeast Corridor, people want us to make investments, which we have, but the fact that the tracks are shoehorned between all these communities on the way between here and New York makes it difficult and expensive to get a train to go 200 miles an hour from here to New York or Boston. So we're trying to do both. We're trying to fix up the system we have, which is the case on the Northeast Corridor in Illinois, and we're trying to be innovative, more innovative in California and Florida. So we hope that, you know, we could have a Spanish-type train that goes, probably won't go 250 miles an hour, but, you know, in California, I think the train will go 200 miles an hour, and it'll run from San Francisco to San Diego. I think the line from San Francisco to LA, maybe within 5 years, you're going to have people riding that train. Within 10 years, within a decade, you'll have California connected with high-speed rail. And the same in Florida, because they have good plans. In Illinois, I think you'll be able to go from Chicago to St. Louis within 5 years, in less than 2.5 hours, at speeds of about 150, 170 miles an hour. So, it's a good plan, and I think it incorporates some of what they're doing in Europe and Asia, and building on some of what's already exists here in the United States. Yes, sir.
I'm not really familiar with the President's plan on high speed, but I was just wondering, does it have included in it sort of a goal ticket price, at which point you declare success for that kind of a system? And is there any kind of idea of that you're applying for the commercial launch industry as well?
Well, with respect to the ticket price, fortunately, we're not going to be setting the ticket prices at the federal level. We'll leave that up to the states to decide that once the trains are in place. I doubt if there will be sort of a national ticket price, if you will. With respect to the space program, we're going to continue, obviously, to work with NASA, and we're going to continue to work with all of you smart people, and we want to be a part of. We're probably not going to be, the leaders in the sense of maybe what NASA will be partners with all of you, and to be honest, I think we will take a lot of our cues from the direction that you're all going, and how we can be helpful. Yes.
Hello, my name is Diane Howard, and I'm from Florida. And I used to use the Florida Tri-Rail, which was the first part of the rail system down there, to get to work. And so I have a question to go back to that. The challenge in using that was always, once you got to your destination, it went north-south. How would you go east-west? How would you get from there? And some counties have far better public transportation situations than others. So does part of your plan include incentives to help build up those kinds of arteries that go east-west to feed the trains? Absolutely.
It's a very good question. And we hope to be able to use light rail and transit to be, and this is what they do in Europe and Spain and other places. I mean, you can't have a train stop at every town, obviously. So you have to have other modes of transportation to deliver people. And some people will drive their cars, somebody might ride a bike, but some people will take a light rail that will go right into the station. This is what they're planning in Denver, frankly. All of the suburban areas will have light rails that will come into Central Station there in Denver, where they will then be able to board an Amtrak train and depart from there. So it will be multimodal, and it will have a lot of connectivity, because we know that every community can't have a stop, and you can't have trains running to every town and in every state. It's too expensive, and so there will be a lot of connectivity. Absolutely. Yes, sir.
Good morning. So my name is Stu Jackson. I work for George. But it's a question dealing with the high-speed railroad. When I lived in France, one of the things that we took the railroad all over the country, and we also flew at different places. So I found that the railroad system worked along with the airline system. Mm-hmm. Now the question is that once this high-speed railroad is completed, what type of impact would it have on the aviation in this country?
It's a good question. The question is, what impact will high-speed rail have on aviation? And we don't quite know the answer to that. And we're going to probably really look at that very carefully and do some studies. I think people in California in the aviation business are worried about that. Today, in California, there are people boarding a plane in San Francisco flying to LA. Well, if there were a train, obviously they wouldn't be doing that, or flying from San Francisco to San Diego. And we know there'll be some impact. We don't know the magnitude of it, and we need to look at that. There are people in Chicago today boarding a plane flying to St. Louis. And that now, if you got in a car and did it, would be a 6-hour drive. And so it's a 1-hour plane ride from O'Hare to Lambert Field. So there'll be some impact. We really need to study what the impact will be. Yes, sir.
Thanks. I'm Don Sargent with the FAA. Question is, how do we reconcile the time horizon for something as bold as commercial space or high-speed rail, which is perhaps a decade of decades, with the shorter time horizon in the political scene, where administrations look forward to the next 4-year election, and the current administration might not be around to take credit for what's been done. And in the private sector, where corporate headquarters look forward to the next quarterly report. Is there a problem in reconciling those two time horizons?
So tell me what your question is.
How do we keep the bold long-term initiatives reconciled with the shorter-term political environment?
Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, think of how many elections there were over the last 50 years that we built the interstate system. We've had many presidents. I don't know, I should add it up. And we've had many Congresses. That did not stop that program. So if you have a big dream and a big plan and a big vision, and you put it in place, and you get buy-in, elections can come and go, and you can still, I mean, think of how many decades it's been since President Kennedy said we're going to put a man on the moon. And the program has continued beyond the time that we put a man on the moon. And we've built on that. And you all are going to continue to build on it. In spite of the fact that there have been many elections and many different presidents and many different Congresses. Look, if a program has value, if a project has value, it won't make any difference who's in office. It'll stand on its own. It'll have its own credibility, and the people will recognize that, and they'll make sure that it gets carried on. Yes, sir.
So, Bill Curry, Director of the Oklahoma Spaceport. Could you reflect on the progress of our next-gen development and hopefully the fact that it will be implemented by the year 2025?
Next gen is a top priority of the FAA. We've already made some big investments in the Gulf of Mexico, a couple of other places around the country, and we will continue to make big investments. We believe that in a country like ours, where people have more access to up-to-date information in their cars than they do pilots have in airplanes or airports, we need to get a program, which we call Next Gen, and make it work and implement it. And we intend to do that. This administration is committed to that. We've committed enormous amounts of money. We want to speed up the funding of this so we can get to it well before the date that you suggest. That's our goal, to do that. There's a strong commitment from the White House to do it, a strong commitment from the airlines. We want to be helpful to the airlines in making sure that they have the technology in the planes, and we have them in the TRACONs, and it will make flying safer. Planes can be guided in and out of airports safer. You save a lot of jet fuel, and you make flying probably much safer than it currently is. We're committed to it.
Hi, Jim Benham from Aerospace Corporation. I'd just like to suggest, sir, that you very widely publicize your findings regarding the foreign high-speed rail systems, because, of course, all the naysayers are claiming that, oh, those trains are all running half empty and the tickets are very expensive and only rich people use it and all these kind of stories.
Sure.
So please very widely publicize that, because
it's a good suggestion.
I've been on high-speed rail in Taiwan, and it's excellent. And while you're building that system, we're all going to go up there and build solar power satellites to give you the clean energy to run those high-speed rail.
Perfect. I like your attitude.
Yes, Jim Dutson, Mobius Legal Group. Safety, we've heard a lot about safety today, and it is paramount for this industry. It's very bad business to crash and kill your customers. However, my concern is the following. In the history of spaceflight, we've had essentially 3 accidents with a loss of human life: Apollo 1, Challenger, and Columbia. And after each, there were multi-year shutdowns of the program. Do you foresee a pathway forward for when the inevitable accident occurs in a spaceflight, that the industry can continue like the airline industry does? We lose about 1,000 people on average over the last 20 years in aircraft, and we don't shut the whole system down. I think that's a real concern about operators, is the first one that goes in, that's it for the entire industry. Your reaction to that?
Well, look, I think you make a good point. And the point that I make all the time is flying is the safest form of transportation. Whether it's in a rocket, an airplane, it is. Last year there were absolutely zero, on commercial airliners, 0 crashes and 0 fatalities. Obviously, we know 2 years ago, the Colgan Air crash in Buffalo, 49 people perished. And as a result of that, though, we put out a very good enforcement about flight, we call it the flight and duty rule for pilot training and a number of pilot rest and so forth. But look, if I were in charge of all of this, I would take your point very well. It's probably a little above my pay grade. I think, God forbid anything happen, and there has to be some kind of a delay. But I think it's a good point. I think that when we have other tragedies in we don't shut everything down. And so I hope it doesn't happen, and I hope we don't have to worry about that kind of a delay. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.